I mean, more news, more detail and more information about this young girl who lost her life yesterday morning?
Yeah, we've been continuing to find out more over the last 24 hours about her. She has, of course, now been named as the Elianne Andam. And really, what can you say? It is a tragedy of gigantic proportions. We know the family have put out a statement now. They've conveyed their shock, their grief and their loss. We heard very briefly from her aunt, Marianne, earlier this morning, who told us that she went to school and simply didn't come home. It's just an unimaginable tragedy for millions of families around the country who will, of course, fear the same thing potentially happening to their children. We also know she wanted to be a lawyer. We spoke to Anthony King yesterday, one of the leaders in this community who's been around the scene today as well, who said that she was scheduled to pass her GCSEs and was a girl with a really bright future ahead of her. So a really seismic loss for this community, for her school friends at the Old Palace School, a £20,000 private school as well. Just an incredible loss, and by all accounts, someone who was really going to go on and achieve great things.
I mean, we heard the Mayor of London there talk about deprivation, talk about investment in children and young people, talk about making sure that there are facilities and youth clubs and activities for young people to do in the evenings after school and in the school holidays. We heard all of that. And then we hear you say, and of course, Elianne attended a private school where the fees were £20,000, just shy of £20,000 a year. And then we wonder about the connection between deprivation and looking after young people and making sure that they're occupied and busy, and this particular young girl who obviously was not leading that life. She was leading the privileged life, we assume, of a private school pupil.
Well, no, of course. And I think this is something you can't countenance. You can't countenance someone you know and love being stabbed to death in that especially horrific and graphic way on their way to school. Outside a very busy shopping centre, near or thereabouts in the centre of Croydon. What we do know, what Marianne shed some light this morning, is that we understand that Marianne's sister, so Elianne's mother, did pay for that private school. We're not completely clear on what the family does for a living. We know that she had been seen many times around a local council estate, around half a mile away from the scene of the crime. So she wasn't far from home at all, and she definitely wasn't far from the school, only about 10 minutes walk away from the school. So there are still many details of this to come out. The police have been investigating now for over a day. We're unsure when the next statement will be from the police. Naturally, of course, there is an extension for them to question the 17-year-old boy, and he may be charged at some point, potentially in the next couple of days. But the police are continuing that investigation, and until then, really, we're not expecting a great many more details to
emerge. No, but certainly on the front page of your own newspaper, The Sun, today, the headline is "Girl 15 knifed to death, saving pal." And that seems to be a detail of information that seems to be being shared in newspapers and across the media, that Elianne might not have been the target here. It might have been that she stepped in a heroic manner, and for that she ended up losing her life. That seems to be what's being suggested.
That is what has been suggested at the scene. We've not had official confirmation of that, but many witnesses, many people who were there at the time have suggested that was the case, that it was the ex-partner potentially of a friend, and she stepped in to try and prevent any sort of attack or melee happening, and in the course of that, sadly, was stabbed and lost her own life. And around half an hour ago, I spoke to a bishop who's come down to the scene. There's 3 or 4 dozen people now at the scene in a sort of impromptu vigil for Elianne. And he said at the time that despite not knowing her personally, but working with many of the religious leaders in the community who did know the family, who are said to be quite heavily religious, that he isn't surprised, given her upbringing, given everything that's been said about her, that she was willing to put herself in harm's way to protect others and protect some of her friends, is what we've been told.
The other thing that I think has emerged over the day in the kind of sort of shroudedness of detail that can't really be given fully at this stage, quite rightly so, of course, is that Anthony King, the youth worker, a very prominent youth worker in Croydon, who was seen on my programme yesterday, you know, in tears because he said it had been such a shock and so disappointing. It seems as if he had worked with the 17-year-old who's been arrested for a period of up to 2 years, which would, I suppose, lead us to believe that this individual might have been a troubled and concerning young man if he'd been worked with so intensively by somebody who's dedicating himself to trying to help the youth of the area.
Yeah, no, that's correct, Vanessa. We heard from both Anthony, who runs the My Ends project in Croydon, and also from several other community leaders as well, that he was known to them. Obviously, no advance on names, not that, that we legally could name him at this stage anyway. And we don't know, what we don't know yet, and what we may not find out actually, is if he was known to the police. But definitely within these community groups that work with grassroots organisations to try and make teenagers make the correct decisions or guide teenagers away from, as the mayor was saying there, these sort of organised crime groups at least, that actually he was on the radar of those groups. We understand multiple of those groups, in fact, and he'd been working with them for around 2 years. And something Anthony King said at the scene actually was that despite that, this still came as a shock. You don't expect to wake up in the morning, as he said, and find that someone you've been working with is alleged to have done something like this. So despite the fact that he was known, it still very much has come as a shock. And Anthony King stressed again that Croydon had gone around 22 months without something like this happening to this extent. And so he was definitely in a state of shock, as you had seen on your programme yesterday, Vanessa, but also yes, many community leaders here are in that same state of shock and upset and distress that's being felt really by the wider community as well.